She's a Mona Lisa. Everyone's lining up to see her.
Hello guys, I am giving you bedroom vibes today. I wanted to be cozy and I don't have a set spot in this house for me to film, and I probably will not until we get out of this house, so I will never have the same backdrop. It'll always be different. Sorry about the messy nightstands. I'm gonna try to crop those out, but let's get into today's video. Okay, so today we are talking about the Colhurst family. I believe that is how you say their name. And their story takes place in Craig, Alaska. Craig, Alaska is home to only about 600 people, so it is a pretty small town. Mark Colhurst was a very hard-working man, and he was very well respected in his community. He was a go-getter who dreamed of retiring by the age of 50, and he had started fishing in his early 20s. I guess I should have said that he's famous, not really famous, but he was a well-known fisherman. And by the age of 20, he was a very, very good fisherman. And in 1979, he had reportedly caught $105,000 worth of fish in a week. In just a week. That's a lot of fish. He was also known to have a cocky attitude and a short temper with people, so you can imagine that he had his, little arguments with people. Who doesn't? I think everybody has kind of a short temper at some point. So his family, they were an average sized family. His wife was named Irene. He had a daughter named Kimberly and a son named John. Now, Mark owned a huge, huge fishing boat. It was 58 feet and was worth $850,000. On September 6th, the Colhurst family didn't decide. They had a birthday party that they went to at a restaurant. And around 9:30 p.m., they docked back home. And when this is about the time that the massacre occurred, I'm sure if you've ever been on a boat, like when you're done for the day, you always get your stuff off the boat, you get what you're gonna take inside, you make sure you don't leave anything, you just kind of get all your stuff rounded up. And I'm sure this is what the family was doing, because it was shortly after they docked that they believe is when the massacre occurred and the killer went on board the boat. So the killer killed them that night, but then the killer actually ended up coming back the next day, and that is when he burned their boat. When they discovered that this boat was on fire, it was fully engulfed. They kind of knew that there was no saving it, but it took them 4 hours to be able to control the fire. Once they were able to get aboard the boat, troopers soon found victims, even though it was very hard to compare the difference between piles of rubbish and piles of human remains. Of course, it took, with how severely they were burned, the only thing was they could find were teeth, so it took dental records, and it took several days to identify each person, and most people on board were not even fully identified. But we will get to that in a little bit. 2 days after finding the boat, and they're going through everything that they can on the boat, what's left of it, they could find more bones and teeth, and they actually ended up finding someone's torso. They believed what they had found was what made up the rest of the crew members that were aboard that night. Now, they are believed to have said there was 8 people on board that night, but again, they can't be absolutely certain, as everything was pretty well destroyed. All of those believed to be killed in this horrific accident were Mark's wife, Irene, who was 28 at the time and pregnant. Mark, who is also 28 at the time, and it is believed that Mark and Irene were shot several times and then, of course, burned. They were the only two on the boat that they could figure out what happened to them, and Kimberly, who was age 5 at the time, and John, who was age 4, as well as Mark's cousin, Michael Stewart, who was 19 at the time, Dean Moon, who was 19 at the time, Jerome Kiwan, who was 19 at the time, and Chris Hyman, who was 18 at the time. John, the youngest on board, they believe that they found him where he possibly would have been sleeping. Found him sleeping where the fire had happened the most. So I looked into this. I don't really know how percent accurate this is, but they believe that John was asleep when the fire started, and where the fire had took place the most is where John was, and they couldn't exactly find remains of his because the fire was so significant that it just took this poor little boy's life. With how the boat was burned, I mean, obviously I've kind of said it a couple times now that it was impossible to find the remains of all 8 crew members. And Hyman were not positively identified, but they did find some remains that fit their criteria or their dental work. I don't know why I said criteria. Now, with not being able to positively identify anyone, a lot of this is like conspiracies, kind of just like guesstimates on how they passed away, like John, Hyman, Moon, because really the only 2 that were positively identified were Mark and Irene. So there is the possibility that some of them may have escaped. I mean, the killer could have taken some of them, you know what I mean? They could be somewhere else, but I mean, this is still an open investigation like 40 years later. So there's so many possibilities with the story of what could have happened to these people. And they don't even know, like, maybe the killer also passed away on the boat. Like, they truly have no idea. Or maybe that the killer was someone that was on the boat. The police have no idea because they can't really get that much evidence. Now, thankfully for this case, there were some witnesses. Now, this is pretty much the only evidence that the cops could get, so the witnesses were a great thing for the story. Even though it's still unsolved, it really, I mean, it just kind of gives hope for this case that eventually it could possibly be solved. And witnesses said that they saw a man in his early 20s and was about 150 pounds, wearing a baseball cap. And then investigators went and they asked, like, people who knew them, obviously, and the men that he hired, and said that it asked if this description fit any of the men that Colehurst had hired. And those locals, they all said no, that they didn't really have anyone that he had hired who fit that description. And then there were some others who said that he did look like someone, like the description fit someone who worked for Colehurst, but it was someone that he had hired in the past. It took 2 years for police to make somewhat of an arrest, and they believed that it was John Peel, who was 23. Peel had worked for Colehurst until about 1980. He was one of the first people that he had hired, and in 1982, John went and worked for another crew. Peel had also dated Colehurst's sister in the past. No physical evidence actually tied Peel to the crime. Just kind of focused on his appearance, and it just kind of seemed like he fit best because him and Mark were actually seen to kind of butt heads towards the end of them working together, and of course he dated his sister, so it just kind of seemed like he had the most motive for the crime. The mayor at the time made a statement saying that there were probably around 500 guys in the town at the time that looked just like him, and then so that kind of just makes this case all more harder. But things got worse for Peel when he actually failed a polygraph test, and that is when acquaintances came out and said that he was fired for drinking and drug abuse by Colehurst. Police charged him with first-degree murder on 8 subjects and first-degree arson. The prosecution theory was that Peel was angered for being fired, and he just flew into a rage, shot Colehurst and everyone on the boat. So Peel's case trial started in March 1986, and the trial actually lasted 6 months. Okay, so a witness testified that he was taking a nap at the time, and he thought that he was just hearing his neighbor's target practice, but then he did hear some screaming, but he just thought that they were just having some, like, family, shooting practice. And he assured the court that he was not dreaming during this time. So the boat's name was The Investor. I'm saying that for this next part because someone said they witnessed Peel boarding The Investor the night or like the day of the murders. And then another witness said that they sold Peel gasoline, which was what caused the fire on the boat. Peel's attorney said that it was clearly and obviously possible that someone else could have caused these murders, and perhaps someone could have hired a killer or a crewman whose body was never identified. The trial ended up just being a hung jury after 6 months and 6 days of debating if he did it or not. They just decided to make it a hung case. Peel's second trial started in January 1988. A newspaper noticed that it was the state's longest running prosecution and a $2 million, the most expensive in this area. And 2 years after, Peel filed a $177 million civil suit against the state for wrongful prosecution, and 7 years later, he settled for a reported $900,000. Detective David McNeil stated, and I quote, "They got the right guy. Just because someone is acquitted doesn't mean they're innocent, just means there's not enough evidence to show guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." And which John stated in an interview with People magazine. He said, and I quote, "Somebody was responsible for this. Somebody out there knows what happened, but I'm not going to waste any more of my life on it." And to this day, the case is still not solved. I don't think that Peel did it. I think that he possibly hired someone to do it. I don't really know. There's not a whole lot of evidence on this case. So again, that was the Colehurst case that took place in Craig, Alaska. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down below what your thoughts are, who you think did this, if you think someone on board did it and they passed away due to the fire. I kind of am thinking that it was someone who was already on board and they passed away from the fire, but I do believe that John may have hired them. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell button so you know every time that I post. So I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye guys.